The morning was soft. Dew hung on the leaves like tiny lights. Birds called in the hedges and a child hummed while she planted a row of small green vines. The village moved slow, like a watchful beast that sleeps with one eye open. People tended the gardens as if they were friends. They fed the soil, sang to the rose, and checked each new leaf with careful hands. Sana walked the path with a tin can of water. She had a long habit of speaking to plants. It made the work lighter and the night quieter. Her gardens were not just food. They were small inventions of life, fences made of thick vines, low hedges that blocked wind and dust, beds of soft grass that hid footprints. The settlers called them healing hedges. The hedges held rain, cleaned the air, and made the land feel like home again. Far above, an alien drone passed along a clean line in the sky. It took pictures and sent them to men who sat in rooms of light. Those men wrote reports and smiled in the way men who know power smile. They called the planet pastoral, harmless, a place that needed no war. They farm, one officer said in a cold voice. They plant and mend. They are not a threat. To the settlers, the drone was a thin eye. It could not see the small things. It could not feel the way a vine clung or the way a root moved water under dry ground. Machines read numbers and lines. People read hands and names. The two ways were not the same. Sana knelt by a young vine and breathed close. The leaf was pale at the edge. She touched it and felt a tiny shiver. The plant did not speak in words, but the shiver was like a note. She answered it with her hand. The vine turned toward her touch and drank the water. She smiled and thought of her mother who had taught her how to plant a row in a one-room house and make a life of small, steady things. Children learned the hedges like a game. They ran between knots of vines, left small toys as offerings, and watched bees that came to rest. The bees carried pollen like tiny yellow gifts. No one taught the children how to coax a bee. They watched and learned. The gardens became a school with soft lessons. One night a neighbor found a plant with a strange bloom. It glowed faint like the blue in a lead lamp. The man called Sana and she came with a lamp and a cup of tea. They stood close and watched the light move as if it were thinking. None of them had seen that bloom before. They laughed with a quick, nervous sound and said it was only the soil changing. But the light did not stop. It blinked once and then sent a tiny scent into the air, a scent that made the neighbor cough and then laugh with a memory on his face. Small things like that did not make the papers. The drone above sent back neat pictures and neat words. The officers wrote, "No military risk. The village would not matter." Then a patrol came down the valley. It was not a loud thing. The patrol moved like a calm knife. Men in pale suits walked with arms that did not tremble. They stepped between the hedges as if walking through a new kind of museum. The village watched from shutters and from behind the low walls. Children held their toys close. The patrol carried tiny boxes and sensors that clicked with a soft, bright sound. At the edge of the garden, one soldier paused by the glowing bloom. He reached out like a child who found a coin in the road. He leaned close. The bloom turned and filled the air with a scent that tasted like a memory the soldier had never had. For a single breath the soldier did not move. His hand relaxed. He blinked and smiled at nothing. For a second his brow was soft as a man who hears a lullaby he forgot. The other soldiers kept walking. They did not see the pause. They moved toward the creek to take water and mark the valley. They spoke the code of their patrol and wrote their notes. The village stayed quiet. Behind doors people counted heartbeats. Later, the patrol returned to their ship. They had walked in and come back out with their machines and their boxes. They reported nothing wrong. Their reports were neat and fine. But the commander read the faces and found a tremor no report could show. One man had a new slow look in his eyes, like a man who had seen a picture of home that he did not remember making. Back in the room of light above the world, the officers frowned. Sensors lost clarity for 15 seconds, a technician said. One unit showed non-standard response to sent input. He blinked as if hearing a voice. The men wrote the data and put it in one folder, anomaly. They did not tell the patrol that the folder would be read again in the nights to come. The village did not sleep well that night. People told stories by lamplight and kept the doors latched. The bloom glowed under a net of cloth, and the children were told to play farther away. Sana sat by her window and thought about the soldier who had paused and smiled. She did not know if that smile was danger or gift. Days passed and small things grew stranger. Drones that watched the hedges sent back fuzzed pictures. A rover that drove near a low fence moved slow and then turned away as if it had forgotten its job. A patrol radioed in a voice that said the hedges made their charts feel wrong. The officers argued and wrote more reports. They planned a probe that would take closer samples, a neat machine that would not blink or worry or remember. Sana and the village did not know of the neat plans. They worked as people do with food to put away, with children to teach. They did not hunt for danger. They tended life. But the life they tended began to answer the questions in ways the machines could not read. The hedges held footprints. The flowers hid the sound of an engine. The soil sang in small ways that a human ear could feel like comfort and a machine would tag as error. When the next patrol came, it moved slower than the first. The men had been warned. They studied maps and checked codes. They wore helmets that were bright and clean. They walked between the hedges with careful steps. They took pictures and wrote down numbers. One soldier paused by the same glowing bloom and then he did something the drone above could not show. He put his hand to his mouth and then he whispered a name. The name sounded small against the rising wind. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The patrol left. The village watched the ship rise and disappear like a dark leaf. People breathed again, soft and small. But some faces had changed. A line had moved inside the patrol's heart. The machines up above would call it a loose variable. The men in the room of light would call it a file to be watched. On the hill, Sana stood and watched the steam from the field rise in the morning red light. She touched a leaf and felt it tremble like a living thing that had just learned a new song. Her hands stayed on the plant a long moment. Far above, a clean line of light moved and a new report was written. Somewhere between the soil and the sensor, a story had begun that neither side could say the name of yet. The morning held its breath. After the patrol left, the village moved quieter than before. People spoke in small voices and walked softer. The glowing bloom under its cloth was moved to the center of the workshop where Sana and a few elders watched it. The light pulsed like a slow heart, and children were not allowed near. People did their work but they watched the hedges with new eyes. Sana worried, but she also felt a strange hope. The plants had always been more than food. They had been shelter and memory. Now they might be a shield. She called a meeting under the old fig tree and asked those who knew how to bend wire and shape glass to help. They were carpenters, seamstresses, and old radio men who had once fixed long-dead radios. They met like neighbors planning a harvest. What if the hedges could show the sky a wrong face? Hassan, the old welder, asked. His hands were thick with years of work. He tapped a pipe and smiled like a man who liked an idea that was not easy. They did not speak of machines or codes. They spoke of light and reflection and of petals that move like mirrors. The plan grew slowly and simply: grow rows of flowers that catch and hold light, hang small, polished leaves made from scrap that look like petals, train vines to bend at certain hours so they point with the sunrise. They would use the plants as frames, not as weapons. The goal was to confuse the eyes that watched from above, not to hurt anyone. Children helped by tying string between stakes. Women wove strips of old tin into the branches and painted them soft colors. Men leaned ladders into hedges and shook down new seeds that glowed faint in moonlight. The village worked at night so the patrols would not see a change and so the drones would have different pictures to remember. When the first mirror-like petal was ready, they put it on the hedge edge by the path where the patrol walked. In daylight it looked like a bright leaf. At night it caught torchlight and sent it far. A small camera that flew too close saw a flash and recorded it. The image the machine sent back was a bright spot with no meaning. The officers above wrote it down as a glare. They did not know the glare had come from a child's painted tin leaf. Next they planted rows of petal flowers that opened when the bees came and closed when the wind pushed. The flowers made patterns that changed with the sun. Drones that flew the same route every day saw the patterns and tried to match them. Their software looked for fixed shapes, but the garden gave moving shapes. The machine sent back wrong pictures, faces where there were only petals, shadows that looked like people. The files in the rooms of light grew full of notes that made the officers frown. The villagers were careful. They did not want to start a war. They wanted to hide paths and to give themselves time. The reflective petals did that. A smuggler named Rafi used a hedge mirror to bring a wounded friend through the fields without a drone finding him. The camera caught the glare and thought it was the sky. Rafi's hands shook when he reached the workshop. He put a cloth over his friend and whispered thanks to a small white flower. The success made the village bold. They built living screens, thick hedges trained to move together like a crowd. At certain hours, a string would pull a vine and the hedge would close its leaves in a slow wave. From above it looked like a flat wall. A drone that passed over would take images and file them away. The next drone that came by saw the wall and recorded nothing unusual. The village could slip behind and carry barrels, no camera would mark the movement. Not all things worked the first time. One early attempt used bright glass and flash. A scout drone saw it and sent a quick report. The officers reacted by changing patrol patterns. The village learned a lesson: sudden changes make machines look harder, but they also force the enemy to adapt. The villagers patched their plan and made it softer, more like a story than a shout. As the living screens grew, so did the questions. At night in the workshop, an old radio man named Kareem played back the drone pictures on his cracked screen. He showed pairs of images, one of empty field, one of the same field with a face that was not there. The children watched and made faces. The elders closed their eyes and thought of what might come if the enemy learned too much. "We are not the ones to start a war," Myra said softly. "We only want to keep our homes." Sana nodded. "We teach the hedges to hide us. We do not teach it to kill." Still, the officers above could not ignore the files that kept changing. A technician wrote a short note: "Reflective anomaly in Sector 6. Suggest further sampling." That small note traveled up to an analyst who had not seen the village. He was a quiet man who liked tidy charts. When he looked at the photos from the fields, something in his face changed. The mirror images showed shapes that might be human, might be nothing. The chart lines wiggled. He sent a coded request back to the orbit: "Explain this reflection." When the message reached the patrol commander, he looked at his morning notes and then at the hedge on the map. He rubbed his eyes and ordered a small sample team to take a closer look. The team that went out knew more now. They wore new lenses and checked their gear twice. They walked into the field with careful steps and made no sudden moves. The villagers watched from behind shutters. Children peered through slats and saw pale boots move between the rows. A small wind shook the petals and 1,000 tiny lights flashed like a soft wave. The patrol stood in the center and pointed instruments. For a long minute nothing happened. Cameras hummed. The man with the sensor frowned. Then a small breeze turned the petals and the hedge made a pattern like a face. The instrument screen showed an image that was both a face and a leaf. The soldier put his hand to his mouth and whispered, without meaning to, a small word in his own language. It was a name he thought he had forgotten. Back in the room of light, the analyst read the soldier's raw feed and then read the report. He saw the blink and the whisper. He typed a new line on his screen: "Subject displayed non-standard emotional response to reflected imagery. Request human read analysis." The file was marked urgent. In the village, The elders felt the air change. The reflective petals had done their job. They had made the machine pause and made a man remember. But the pause came with a new problem: the enemy would come closer to learn. The village now had a small window of extra time and a new worry pressing like rain. Sana stood by the hedges at dusk and watched the petals flicker like bright coins in the last light. She placed a small hand on a vine and felt it lean into her palm. The plants were quiet, but the whole field seemed to listen. Somewhere above, a line of light moved and a command was typed and sent. On the screen a new word blinked: explain. The village held its breath. They called it the chorus because it had a sound like 100 small voices. At first it was only a thought in Sana's head: what if life itself could speak in patterns that machines did not know? She did not mean harm. She meant hiding, movement, the slow cleverness of living things. The village moved like a family learning a new song. Old women who knew the rhythm of rain taught boys how to knock on hollow logs to make a beat. Children learned to whistle a call that bees answered. Men bent long reeds so frogs would sit in a row and croak in a careful time. The chorus grew from small acts. It was hands and patience, not metal and orders. They did not try to make monsters. They used what was already there. Birds that nested in hedges flew in little patterns. Beetles that loved the bright moss were guided by crumbs and by quiet voices. The plants were arranged so their leaves rustled at certain winds. At night, the village walked very softly and moved sticks and stones in places that made the birds sing a little different tune. The first test was simple. A small group needed to move a wounded man through the fields. Drones watched the road. The team could not move him on the main path. So they walked at dusk into the hedges where the chorus lived. The birds rose and settled, the frogs kept their slow drum, and the reeds made a sound the drone had never mapped. From above the cameras saw a pattern that shifted and weathered into what looked like rain. Its software tried to mark a human shape and came back with a different answer: moving leaves? The drone hovered, then drifted away. The team moved the man to safety with quiet hands. They carried him like a secret. Word of the success spread like a season. People who had resisted change now put fresh branches into the hedges and whistled to the sparrows. Hassan carved small chimes that only certain insects would touch. Rafi set nets of light-reflecting threads to catch a drone's beam and throw it off like a mirror. The chorus became richer. It also became alive in the mind of the village. It was not a thing they turned on and off. It had moods. Not every night was good. Once a patrol passed a reed bed that had been set to sing. The soldiers heard a sound and one of them, tired and thin-eyed, began to hum along without thinking. The hum was a small human sound, not recorded by machines as useful data. He hummed and turned his head and saw a child behind a hedge. The child dropped a small toy and ran. The soldier did not shoot. He walked on. People who watched from windows cried a little and said thanks to the sky. As the chorus grew, the machines above sent back pictures that looked wrong. The maps filled with files labeled pattern anomaly. Analysts typed messages into reports and debated. The enemy tried to beat the chorus by brute force. They burned a patch of grass to see whether the sound would stop. It did not. The birds moved their nests. New green climbed into the scorched ground. Nature does not learn in a day, but it learns in a season, and the chorus learned to change its song. There was also a hard argument inside the village. Some people worried. "We are changing wild things for our war," Myra said. Her voice was flat as bread. "What if we break the land we love?" Sana answered with a small, tired smile. "We teach the living to hide us. We do not teach it to hurt. We ask it to be clever, not cruel." The debate stayed long into the night. They voted and watched the hedges more. They set rules: never harm a creature, do not make a sound that would trap a child, do not make the chorus last forever in one place. They kept the living like a guest in a home, not a tool in a box. Then came the night of the field convoy. The convoy moved under the moon. It had food and medicine and a long crate of batteries. A scout drone circled above them, clean and bright. The convoy entered the hedges and the chorus began its work. Leaves rustled in patterns. Beetles crossed the path in slow files. Birds fell in a line and burst up together, making a sky of wings. The drone's camera tried to parse the motion. Its logic expected static shapes and clear movement. The chorus moved like a story that changed its ending every few steps. The drone slowed, then blinked. For a short, sharp breath the convoy moved without the world knowing. They passed the checkpoint and reached the river. Men unloaded barrels like ghosts. When the drone finally turned and saw the empty track, its log gave an error that said only, unspecified movement. The success felt like a warm bread. The convoy came home. People hugged and passed silent cups of tea. The chorus had bought time and it had done so without a gun fired. But the enemy learned. They always learn. A patrol returned with a small piece of device in a box. Its shell had a scratch pattern the villagers had not seen. The officers in the rooms of light had started to watch for moving stories rather than still shapes. They tried to teach their machines to expect the songs. Their software grew thicker with rules. One night when the chorus was loud and full, the sky answered with something new. A quiet pulse moved through the air, an alien sound the villagers could not hear, except as a small pressure that made leaves shiver strangely. The birds dropped their tune. The beetles slowed. The chorus paused, as if someone had put a hand on its shoulder. In the workshop Hassan watched the machine's eye blink with worry. They have learned to listen, he said. Rafi rubbed his hands and did not smile. They will come closer to study. They will send a small team. We must be ready. Sana felt the old fear. Then she felt something else, the deep, stubborn will to keep their home. We will teach the chorus to change again, she said. We will not make it one song. They worked for days and long nights. They moved nests, changed paths, taught new rhythms. The chorus learned not to be predictable. It became 1,000 small choices instead of one pattern. It was like teaching a child to tell a secret differently each time. When the patrol returned, it found new songs. The soldier who had hummed before walked blind between reeds that made no music he knew. His sensors gave him names that meant nothing. The patrol radioed back confusion and then silence. On the hill, Sana watched the sunrise and felt both joy and dread. The chorus had saved a life and made the enemy change. But the enemy had also changed. Somewhere beyond the clouds, engines moved. New orders were given in rooms of clean light. The folder for the village's files had a new mark, escalation. The village held its breath. The chorus had become more than hiding. It had become a living answer. And answers, once heard, force the question of what will come next. The village now moved with a new carefulness. The chorus had taught them to hide. The pedals had taught them to reflect. But names were different. Names were small and heavy things. They carried memory and faces and the sound of a hand saying, I am here. Sana believed names could do more than hide. She believed names could make a machine see a face instead of a target. They did not hurry. The idea grew at the edge of the workshop like a slow thought. First they made lists. Old men wrote down names of people who had lived and worked in the fields, mothers, teachers, children who once laughed on a hill. Women wrote names of places, the well, the white fence, the oak that gave shade. Children drew pictures and wrote names under them in paint that would show from far away. Hassan and the others turned those words into small things the plants could hold, little seed pouches with colored threads, tiny flags sewn with names, paint on leaves that made shapes when the sun hit them. The living screens learned to open in a pattern that spelled letters in the morning when the light came. The village practiced the pattern like a slow song. Each morning a hedge would lift its leaves and make a soft, moving script of light. We are not making a weapon, Myra said when some asked. We are making a mirror. We will show who we are. They also taught the chorus to sing names. Children stood along the hedgerow at dusk and said a name. A bird, trained by crumbs and kindness, would rise and land on a marked branch and call back a small note. Those notes nested like tiny echoes. The living broadcast was a patchwork of leaves, mirrors, bird calls, and human voices. It was gentle. It was human. When the first live broadcast went out, a drone passed over and its camera captured something the machines did not know how to read. Instead of clean numbers, the file sent back to the rooms above had faces stitched into light. The analysts looked and found names in data that had never had names. The clean reports turned messy. A file that used to say target, sector 3 now read a list of small words and sounds. Machines do not have memories like people. Machines have records. The broadcast had put memory where the machines expected only numbers. A captured probe had been in the lab for days, its casing opened and its circuits watched by Sana and Myra. It had listened to stolen songs and to the chorus. The probe had recorded a patch of the living broadcast and then, to the surprise of everyone, it played back one of the names in a voice that was not quite the probe's and not quite human. The lab went very quiet. The probe then did something more strange. Its screen showed a small image, a child's face the probe had never seen before. The probe repeated the name the child's mother had said. It sent the sound back in a loop. The men and women in the workshop felt the screen like cold wind. The probe had learned to carry a small human thing. They did not know how the alien machines would turn that. The rooms of light received the files. Officers read them and frowned. The admiral ordered a study. He wanted to know why his instruments now returned names that were not in their databases. The analysts argued. A quiet analyst, someone who liked rules and charts, typed words into his file: anomalous mimetic data. Suggest emotional analysis. When the analysts asked for emotional analysis, someone high up laughed and said, emotions are not code. Why waste time? But the file kept growing. The probe continued to send back names and tiny images. The machines that used to only count now carried fragments that looked like stories. One night the admiral ordered a probe to come down close. It hovered near the hedges that spelled a long list of names at sunrise. The probe's sensors reached into the leaves and into the small flags. The village watched from windows and from safe places. The hedges moved slow with the light. Children called names softly and the birds answered. The probe took the feed and sent it up. In the room of light the admiral watched the screen. The feed did not show only code. It showed people. It named them. The admiral read the list and his face changed. The machines on his console blinked and reported pattern: human, social. The admiral did not know that word. He asked for a translation and the analyst tried to explain with maps and charts and failed words. The feed had done something the admiral's machines did not expect, it had put weight where there had been none. A signal came back from the admiral's channel. It was short and cold. Why? It asked, not in the admiral's voice, but in the dry language of the fleet. The probe echoed the question, a single syllable that did not fit the music of the hedge. The answer that came from the hedges was not mechanical. It was many voices. The children said names. The elders said names tied to stories. The living screens shone letters like small fires. The chorus of plants and people made a sound not meant to kill, but meant to remember. The probe recorded it and then, slowly, showed the admiral the same list of faces and names. The admiral read the names and felt something flicker. He had led fleets and taken ground and counted losses. He had never had a name that should not have been a number. The memory of a name is a small danger. It makes decisions slow. Above, commanders argued in cold tones. Some said do not think. Attack and clear. The analyst who had seen the probe's new files sat alone and tapped a new line: hypothesis, mimetic feedback causes hesitation in decision matrices. Recommend containment. The admiral did not like words he did not understand, but he also did not like losing control. He ordered a closer study. He sent a quiet, fast ship to take the probe back and to test the hedge with heavier sensors. The village heard the engines and felt the wind in the leaves. Sana stood by the hedges and felt a tightness. She had not wanted to frighten anyone. She had wanted to make a mirror so the enemy might see people, not simply targets. Now that mirror had looked back and the enemy had seen names. The admiral's quiet question, "Why?" sat like a stone. In the workshop they argued softly. "We made them hear names," Myra said. "We gave them faces. We gave them our truth," Hassan answered. "We must be ready," Rafi said. "They will not only study. They may come to take. Or they may come to learn." Sana looked up at the small bright point that moved like an extra star on the horizon. The probe's file kept blinking in the workshop letters and faces and one small word that had not existed in the machine's language, "Why?" The village held its breath. The hedges trembled in the evening wind, as if they too wondered what answer would come next. Dawn came slow and pale. The hedges breathed in the light and lifted their leaves like hands. People moved with quiet steps. Children tucked names into little pouches and tied them to branches. The whole village felt like a small drum, ready to beat. Sana stood at the edge of the field and watched the sky. Far above a bright ship moved in a careful arc. The admiral had sent more probes. He had asked why, and now he wanted an answer. The village had given him names. Now they would give him something more, a choice. The plan was simple and hard. They would not attack. They would show. They would put faces and names where machines expect only targets. They would make a living broadcast that filled the air with memory. If the machines could not count people as numbers, the commander might see them as people. If he saw them as people, he might stop. At sunrise the village began. Hedges opened in a slow wave and painted letters of light across the fields. Children sang names like a list of promises. Men lifted mirrors and polished them until they caught the sun. Birds that had been trained to land on marked branches flew in a careful order and called the notes the village had taught them. The chorus of living things and human voices became a single thing, a long, soft broadcast. The probe dipped close. Its cameras drank the sound and light. The data flew up to the admiral's room of light. Analysts watched the feed. For the first time the admiral did not see a map of lines. He saw faces. He saw names. He listened to a child say a name, and the name sounded like a life. Someone in the room put a small, old photograph on the table. It was a picture of a family under trees, laughing. The admiral stared at it, then at the screen. Machines do not need pictures, but people do. The admiral had never had to hold a name before. The list on his panel hummed with new noise. Orders came in quick. Some commanders said strike and finish it. Others said pause and study. The admiral closed his eyes and felt time slow. He thought of his own logbook of numbers. He thought of lives that could be written as data. He felt a tiny looseness in the iron of his command. Down in the village Myra watched the sky and thought of the men taken from the convoy. She felt anger and a burning need for safety. But she also felt the work they had done, the hedges, the mirror leaves, the chorus. She looked at Sana and saw the same tired hope. "We ask them to see us," she said. "Not only to know we are here, but to know why." The admiral made a choice that surprised nearly everyone. He ordered a stop. Not a retreat. A stop. He sent a small envoy craft to the field. The craft was small and white against the blue. It landed beyond the hedges in a place made safe by the village's plan. People watched from behind nets and screens. They had practice for violence. Now they were about to meet words. The envoy did not come with guns. It came with a single speaker and a clean voice. A figure stepped out and carried a small tablet. It spoke in the admiral's language, but the voice was careful and not cruel. "We saw names," it said. "Why do you give us these names?" Sana stepped forward. Her voice was small and clear. She told them why. She spoke of soil and children, of meals shared, of nights when the stars were the only light. She spoke of fear and of the day the convoy burned. She spoke of names not as weapons, but as proof that each life matters. The envoy listened. At times it tilted its head like a bird. It asked questions that were slow and not meant to trap. "If your fields stop our harvesters, will your people still eat?" it asked. "If we leave, will you send your kin into space again?" Myra answered with truth. "We will plant and feed our children. We seek life, not war." She told them about the machine under the hatch and how it helped fill a barrel. She did not hide that they had used the machine to confuse the harvesters. She said it plainly because she wanted trust, not trickery. After long hours the envoy went back to its ship and rose. It did not leave immediately. It hovered and sent a message up. The admiral read the new feed and his face was not sharp as before. He had seen names and heard reasons. He had watched children sing. He chose a different course. He ordered a pause in the harvesters' patrols and called for talks. He would not sign a treaty that very day, but he would not press his ships into the fields again. He sent a demand for clearly marked neutral zones and for shared water points that machines would not take. The village did not celebrate loudly. People worked in quiet now with a new kind of tired relief. They had not beaten the fleet by weapons. They had changed the shape of a decision. The admiral had learned that counting is not always enough. News moved fast. Other species in nearby systems watched the message feeds. Some were curious. Some were worried. A distant ship, one that had not smiled at humans in records, turned its course and came closer to sea. The galaxy had noticed that life could be used as armor without killing. In the months that followed, envoys came back and talks rustled. The harvesters slowed near the agreed lines and sometimes stopped. The machine in the hatch slept and hummed and the children planted more names in the earth. People still repaired dents and counted losses. They still buried friends. But they planted rows of new green, too. Sana walked through the hedges one evening and touched a leaf. A small light flicked and a bird answered with a note she had taught it. She smiled and thought of all the small hands that had built the chorus. She thought of the admiral who had paused, and of the small envoy who had asked why. At the border, a new bloom opened. It was not quite the same as the village plants. It had a strange color like a folded star. People called it the peace flower. It would live between fields and ships. It would be a witness. Far above, the admiral sent a last caution into his log: do not assume harmlessness is weakness. Some things learn fast. The analyst who had once typed charts sat quietly and wrote a different note: names change machines. On a quiet night, children laughed while they hung a name on a branch. A far ship blinked and turned. The galaxy had learned a small, sharp truth: life can be gentle and strong at once. And when life learns to answer, it becomes a kind of force that no one should mistake for being harmless.